OODAcast, informing your decisions with intelligence, analysis, and insight. Brought to you by the team at OODALoop.com.
Hi, I'm Matt DeVoe. Welcome back to OODAcast. Today we have Gary Harrington joining us. Gary has a very interesting career trajectory that includes media, intelligence community, and then as a private security consultant. So Gary, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thank you, Matt. Good to see you.
So why don't you step us through kind of your background, what was your career progression?
So my career progression was stay somewhere until you could, till you piss people off enough and then go somewhere else. No, I think I was a person that was always seeking, always hungry, always wanting a new adventure. So I got commissioned in the Marine Corps as an infantry officer. And after a year of doing that, I heard about this reconnaissance stuff. So I tried out for that, made that. And then I spent the next year and a half doing that. Made captain in the Marine Corps, got promoted or made captain. And then they said, well, hey, you're going to have to go take like an admin job for a few years. And that just didn't sit with me. So I resigned from the Marine Corps and enlisted in Special Forces. Figured, well, hey, this way I can spend a whole career having adventures and not have to worry about doing admin. And then I spent next almost 20 years in Special Forces. I was in 7th Special Forces Group, Delta as an assaulter, and then 5th Special Forces Group, up through 9/11 and the beginning of Afghanistan. And then after that, towards the end of my military career, I started working on some projects where I coordinated with the agency and liked that pretty well. And I wound up being loaned from the Army, detailed from the Army to the agency after Afghanistan for some other stuff around dealing with Iraq. And then it seemed like a good fit. So, on a Friday, I retired from the Army, and on the next Monday, I was at the agency. So then I spent 11 more years in the agency, and then retired, thought it was time to do something other than government work. So I retired, took an early retirement from the agency. Cool. And then, after that, I think like everybody else, like government fits in with government contracting. I looked at government contracting. I had a bit of a well-known reputation within some of the circles. So I got some security work pushed at me. The former director of the FBI recommended me to his former boss. So, we did that for a while, but those jobs didn't really suit me. I mean, security, it's just hiring people and getting contracts, that didn't really suit me. And the same with government contracting. I like to plan and to work, but then it's really about percentages and hiring and that. So it just didn't suit me. So now I prefer to consult with people because I like helping individuals and families. It feels like I can offer expertise and experience from things I learned over all my years in undercover and in combat that help people's everyday lives. And, that gives me a lot of satisfaction. And especially, in recent times, it seems like more and more the everyday citizen here realizes they need some of that. So yeah. It's real satisfying to me.
Excellent. I feel like we glossed over a major segment of your career, 20 years in the Special Forces, including Delta Force, Are there any operations from that time frame you can step us through that served as kind of a great lesson learned for you, or you came out of that with some sort of leadership skill or insight, that you found valuable through the rest of your career?
Well, you learn more from your mistakes. So I think I was lucky enough to survive some mistakes. Um, I'll tell you a humorous one was prior to the Iraq War. I was in the run up to that. I would take a small team of Kuwaiti people that were not trained. They weren't military people, and I would go into some bad guy territory and a couple nights a week, and I was the expert, and everybody else didn't know what they were doing. So I thought I was really I felt I was invincible. And one day there's the border between Kuwait and Iraq has this big giant ditch. There's a big berm, and then there's a 15-foot deep, 15-foot wide ditch. It's anti-tank obstacle. I had to get somebody back across that. And, I had night vision goggles, and I could see this peasant type guy was down in the ditch, and he kept looking for a place where it was kind of broken up to climb up, and he couldn't. And we sit there, and you're worried about an Iraqi patrol happening along. And so it just kept taking a long time. Hey, I've been a mountain climber. I've been to mountain climbing school. I can climb buildings, that I learned in Delta and all. So I was like, hey, I'll get him out, and I can climb out. So I had the guys hold me by my arms and drop me down in this ditch. I get the guy out, and then guess what? I couldn't get out. So now time is slipping by, and I'm stuck in a ditch, and I'm an American, and this is before the war starts. And now I'm worried about, when's the Iraqi patrol going to come by? Am I going to wind up being a prisoner here? So, Mr. I'm the expert and everybody else is an idiot. Had to sit and think for a while. And then I think finally had several guys took their bootlaces off and tied their bootlaces together. And I was able to use that as they made it like a loop, and I was able to get a foothold from that enough that I got out. But it was a big lesson in humility for me, because I'm like, yeah, I'm the trained expert and these are a bunch of idiots. And so I learned that, hey, that, and then also preparation. So I made sure that we had the equipment to deal with climbing in and out of a ditch like that the next time. Yeah. And I think the biggest thought, it wasn't about I might get killed. It was, this is going to be really embarrassing when I have to explain how I got captured by the Iraqis sitting in this hole. But that didn't happen. So, that was one lesson. And another type of lesson is in paying attention to your instincts and being aware of your surroundings. And because once in Afghanistan in early 2002, I was leading the tactical part of an agency team at that time, and they wanted to do a meeting by this warlord wanted to meet. So we went up in the valleys. This was just before Operation Anaconda. And it was very, out high plains, at high altitude, but we were out in this level plain in this little group of buildings and surrounded on all sides by mountains further out, but we were just out vulnerable in the open. And after we'd been there a little while, the guy wasn't showing up. Well, then I noticed that while it was kind of like this mud hut outpost and store, that people disappeared. And then I started thinking, and I only had like 6 guys that were trained shooters with me. And we were, we made a perimeter and were ready, but it was just too vulnerable and we were taking a long time. So, you start getting those spidey senses, right? And that we've been here too long. And anytime you're a small team or by yourself and you go into bad guy territory, I think it's like you light a fuse, that you have X amount of time that you can be there before people find out and they start assembling forces or put IEDs in or whatever to get you. So you have to be aware of what that window is. So, and I told the guy, I said, hey, I can give you like 5 more minutes, but we've got to pull out. And so we did that. And sure enough, after we got back, we found out that through SIGINT, they heard Al-Qaeda on radios talking that they had put ambush in around half or 2/3 of the way around us, and we're waiting for the others to get in place before initiating an attack on us. And so, the lesson from that was like, wow, you do have a time window, and we're not all sneaky peeky that you can infill somewhere and do something and be totally hidden from people. So, get out while the getting's good, I think was the lesson that I learned from that.
I think that's an important lesson where you're talking about the instincts, but then also, the quickness of making decisions. That's something that I've observed even working with business leaders, is that they constantly are trying to wait for the perfect moment or the perfect data in which to make a decision. But you reach this compression time frame where the decision needs to be made based on the data that you had, right? Your instincts were firing. You understood that, the adversary, when given time, will set up that kind of ambush or IED. And you made the decision that enabled you to keep the folks that were with you safe. Had you waited for, well, I want evidence of an ambush, or I want them to give me the SIGINT that the ambush is coming. Once you waited for perfect data, it would have been a decision that was too late for you.
I agree with what you said, that, and in life, even your personal safety, that if you are vigilant, and you're watching, you start picking up those early signals, and the more you're not distracted, the quicker you can pick up the early signals. And then you have an evolving matrix of decisions, and the earlier you make a decision, the less dire the consequences are generally. I have a story that's the opposite of that, where I ignored that. A few years later, I was I was on a corner in Kabul and I was supposed to meet this person. So an interpreter and I were, standing on a street corner in Kabul. And as we were standing there, I tried to stay kind of out of the way, because clearly if anybody close could see I was a Westerner, and we were certainly targets, because this was in probably 2006 or 7. And, I was worried about somebody coming up and attacking me. So I'm scanning, you scan close, you scan far, you're looking around. And I noticed that off to my left, just across the street from me, was a black Toyota sitting there with 2 guys in it. And it was unusual that a car was sitting where this was. But I looked at him and I couldn't see anything. And then I saw a policeman across the street from him. So, okay, let me move on. And you keep scanning, but yet there was something nagging at me. And but because, unlike a few years before in that last story I told you, I was waiting to meet somebody, and I felt that was important, that I needed to meet this person. So I stayed there. The person then came up, and I took them back to talk with them at the U.S. Embassy. But right as soon as we entered the embassy compound, literally a minute and a half, 2 minutes after we left that place where I was standing, there was a devastating explosion. You feel the ground shake. The embassy alarms went off. So it turned out that intersection where I was, there just had been a VBIED there. And, I waited it out. There were U.S. casualties, a couple people killed, several wounded. I think a whole lot of Afghans were killed and wounded. And so it turned out, and I went to the embassy officials to ask that black Toyota I saw was the suicide vehicle.
Wow.
And, those two guys looked at me and I looked at them, and they had to realize, they realized I was a Westerner. So I've often imagined the conversation they must have had, like, well, hey, we're supposed to kill the Westerner. Here's one right here. We're waiting. And so it was pure luck that they decided no, and they waited, and it was a U.S. military convoy came along right after I left the corner, and that's what they drove into and detonated themselves. But the lesson for me was that when this other incident happened, I listened to my instincts and made the decisions and left. In this other incident, I didn't. I hesitated and I rationalized. I have a job to do. Let me stick it out. And, to be honest, I guess it's probably just pure luck that they made the decision. No, this isn't the guy we want to, let's wait and see if we get something else.
Yeah.
But I totally gave away any ability I had to affect the outcome by not making that decision. So that to me goes to your point that it's great to get information, but then you need to be willing to make those decisions.
Interesting. Yeah, that's fascinating. So you also have the distinction, of being one of the handful of people that was early into Afghanistan after September 11th. Can you kind of step us through, what happened up to and leading into participating in that endeavor?
Yeah. So on 9/11, I was leaving I was in 5th Special Forces Group. So I was leaving my house to go to the airport to go to Tampa and help coordinate a exercise with 5th Group, the Joint Special Operations Command in a foreign country, working with a foreign government. And on the radio, I heard the news of the first plane hitting. Thought, well, wait a minute, this is odd. So it doesn't seem like it. And I had a few minutes to spare, pulled into a little tiny diner, turned their TV on in time to see the second plane hit. And instead of continuing to the airport, I turned the other way and just went to my office in 5th Special Forces Group. And we immediately jumped in and we started planning for the invasion of Afghanistan. Then I was the first of the 5th Group to go to Afghanistan. To go to Uzbekistan, where we launched out of. And I coordinated with the agency. My job was to kind of facilitate the cooperation so that the Special Forces and the Army could infill, resupply, and support agency teams too, because there's a big, cooperation between the agency and Special Forces in the early time part of Afghanistan. So I did that, and then I went in to Afghanistan in late October, and wound up going to an agency team that was in Jalalabad, which wound up being the team that went up to Tora Bora. So I was with another SF team that accompanied them, and we went up and were running the OPs, calling in the air for Tora Bora. And so that was interesting. And, you know, just to try to work with locals, and then you have all that focus on trying to get bin Laden, but then they were squirting out and escaping at night, and we couldn't seal in everything. And then, you know, probably with help from the locals, you know, a lot of the people escaped. So yeah, and I learned lessons there because that was Ramadan and we weren't prepared for Ramadan. And the Afghans would send soldiers forward in the daytime with no food or anything because it's Ramadan. Well, then at night they would retreat back so they could eat and drink. And so it was really difficult to try to take ground and hold ground. And, you know, for me, I jumped from there to another place to go open up coast Afghanistan. And so I jumped on with another agency team. And this time we got on the ground in coast. I learned my lesson to work out the logistics so that, you know, I did stuff like build chow trucks that had the cooking and food, everything that we could take forward so that it wouldn't have to retreat. After coast, there were two warlords that were they had a lifelong feud. So they were threatening to kill each other, and they were more intent on that than helping us track down Al Qaeda up in the coast region. So I came up with a plan to divide them, and one had most of his tribal ties to a place called Orgun, Afghanistan, right across the Pakistani border at Waziristan. And so I ended up splitting them up, and I led a team up to Orgun, and where we opened up a new base in Orgun to work with that warlord. And so we did that. Then I got the message to go join another agency team and in prep for Operation Anaconda. So then I did that. And then during that run up to Anaconda is when that incident where we had been partially surrounded by Al Qaeda happened. So that was, it was busy. Most teams, like if you saw the movie 12 Strong, you know, a team comes in on top of an agency team and they are there a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks and then they're out. I went in with the agency teams and I would stay until we brought in SF. And then I would jump on another agency team and would go in and set it up and stay until they brought in SF, and then just kept repeating that. So for me, it was I went in and stayed 5 months.
5 months. Wow. So that time frame in October, how many were involved? I know the 12 Strong, those are some of your colleagues. I remember meeting at least one of them at your retirement party from the CIA. How many of you were in Afghanistan at that point in time?
Well, you know, I think all in all, I don't know if it was like about 100, and how many of those were team guys. And then, you know, you start bringing in support people. Let's say ODAs in 2001. So we're talking, October, November, December. There were probably like 6 or 7 teams. And then by the time you roll to into 2002, probably another, probably double that, or, you know, 20 something teams. So 100, 150 guys, probably at its max. And then the agency guys. And then, you know, that was Afghanistan was known for, with the agency and special forces, they toppled the Taliban government, you know, using a lot of air power. And so there never was a great amount of Americans. But, you know, I have to caveat that and say it's always easier to knock, when you play King of the Hill, it's easier to knock somebody off the hill than it is
And to
to
maintain.
stay on the hill.
Mm.
The Taliban was not prepared for us. They weren't prepared to withstand an air campaign. So it was very easy to, to be honest, to roll in and call in air and make them start giving up territory and fleeing. And I remember standing at the top of Tora Bora, though, and telling the guys around me that, hey, they're going to regroup. This is their home. They have sanctuary all around us. That once they get reorganized and regrouped, they're going to come back. And, we're going to be here. It'll be, if we don't give it up, in 10 years, we'll still be here. Well, now, hey, we're coming up on next year on 20.
Yeah.
And we're still there.
Still.
Yeah.
Which is something we claimed we wouldn't do. One more question about the military time frame, then I'd love to switch over to the CIA. But, I'll say it so you won't have to, but, the Delta Force teams are considered to be the most elite of the elite. So for people that are trying to operate elite teams that are kind of outside the military, what are some of the things that you think makes Delta so successful that would convey to somebody running an elite team of hackers or business leaders?
Well, I think one is that you select good people to start with. And you have to select people of character. Hey, sure, there's some that get through no matter what we do.
Sure.
But you select good people and people that have heart and drive. And it's one of the big characteristics they look for is never give up. And the whole selection process is designed to really push you mentally and physically so that, a person that's the type of person that would give up doesn't generally make it.
Mm.
And then once you're in, they train you very well. The operators training course is super, super intensive. And you become very proficient at the skills. Yeah, in Delta, you learn some different shooting skills and other things that are more nuanced. But what it's still the basics of shoot, move, communicate, but you do them to a very high degree of efficiency. And, in Delta, your training is very realistic. There's not a lot of margin for safety. You shoot around each other. When you're practicing tossing grenades really close beside you to break contact, that's what you do. In the rest of the military, we have a lot of safety, extra safety built in. Delta relies on the people they recruited, the training they have, and the proficiency they have to give a lot of trust to that individual. So to me, when I look at teams now and the occasions I've had to build teams after, I've tried to do that same thing. I tried to equip and support people well. And I was very particular in who I recruited and threw out people that some would surprise some people. Then I looked for within that organization, where's the right fit for people. Hey, some guys might be great as a security guy, but he really sucks as an intel analyst. And so it's moving people into the right position. And then, giving them the freedom to make choices and make decisions and support those decisions. And Delta does that with that it's an NCO driven unit, which is very unusual for military, but it's done, that's that way because they are so well trained and prepared. So.
Excellent. Yeah, that's good insight. I love the aspect of never quit. I think that's true with some of the best hackers that I've met. The kid that worked for us at Fusion X, Victor that a couple months ago, his wife asked him to fix an issue with her printer at the house. And he just noticed that the driver installed itself weird, and he just dug and dug and dug until he figured out the vulnerability associated with that, right? So it was one of those things. It doesn't sound like it is, something that's very interesting or compelling in a print spool or driver on a Windows machine. But he saw that, like he had that little bit of insight, and he had the drive to just continue and continue and continue. And it resulted in him being able to, successfully find an exploit there. So transition.
And see, that's a personality trait, right?
Yep.
So he would apply that to other.
Yeah, you can apply that to anything. That's why I think some of the dynamics that make, the Delta teams so successful can be applied to other areas, whether, it is cybersecurity or other business dynamics. So you transition from the military into the CIA. It was special activities divisions. I imagine there's a lot of similar stuff that you were doing while you're in the military, but how did the mindset or operational tempo change for you when you made that transition into the intel community?
So for me, I was aging, and I'd said, I don't want to be that 60-year-old trying to carry a rifle. And I looked at the agency and said, here's a place I can go and serve my country, get some adventure. So I actually did not go SAD route. I went the regular case officer route, because I thought that had more longevity. But it's more admin, a lot of writing. You do the dinner circuit. We've all heard stories from how it is at the farm, and you're a diplomat undercover, and you play that. Of course, for me, that's what I thought I was moving into. But after I became certified as a case officer at the beginning of my career, said, oh, we have a new job. I went back to Afghanistan, which was supposed to be for a year, but it wound up being 3. And then the people there knew me from either Iraq or Afghanistan, or so that of me, I was out chasing down IEDs and meeting with Taliban, and going out with ground branch people out in the bases and stuff. So it was good. It was exciting. I got to do a little bit of the traditional working in the Capitol, trying to recruit people in the Afghan government or whatever. So that was it was a big change. It goes to go from the guy that's on the point doing the dangerous stuff to guys that were my former as a case officer. They were the guys that when I would go out for a meeting, would drive you and serve as bodyguards. There were actually a couple of times where they turned to me and said, "Can you help us?" And I was honored that they thought enough of me, my skills, that they still would trust me to do that, because they don't generally trust a case officer to do that. And you have to look at, and for me, like one of the biggest achievements I had as far as this whole counter-terror war, including being in Delta and all, was actually using a combination of my military experience officer to plan and run a couple major counter-terror operations that resulted in that were successful and had very good results. And I said, wow, I actually had more impact on the bigger war on terror sitting behind a desk and going to meetings than I ever did being sniper instructor, all that. And so I never thought when I started my career as a young man that, wow, the biggest impact you'll have is behind the desk. Illuminating for me.
Yeah. Interesting. So, one thing that I've seen you write and talked to a couple different times is, from an individual safety perspective, you talk about operating in Yemen all alone for several months and having the same requirements as, somebody else, whether it's a team or whatnot from a security perspective. So can you kind of step through that mindset? What is it like to be kind of a one-man team that is responsible for the entirety of your own security?
So it's, when you go somewhere like Yemen or some of even other countries, and you don't have, you have to provide the same security, but you don't have those other people to do that with. When you're on a team, you take turns. When you're even with one other person, one of you is watching the other person's back. You never do anything alone. Well, then if you're required to be by yourself, you've got to figure other ways to provide that security. And, I learned that you have to be on. There's no downtime. That when you're out, like when I'm driving somewhere around Yemen, I can't relax and think about something else. I have to be tuned in to what's going on in the cars around me, what's going on the sidewalks around me, what's my route, what's my emergency route. If I get blocked here, where am I going? So, it's kind of like you can't ever let down. It's not the same security, but it is more. You have to do your homework ahead of time more. You need to understand your routes more. And if you're one guy maybe with a pistol, you're not going to use the same shooting techniques and try to shoot your way out of trouble. So you need to find that way to avoid it first, recognize it. And, it's like we talked about earlier, make your decision early back or try to seek safety in somewhere else. You can't, when you go month after month, you have to have some downtime. But the question is that when you have the downtime, it's like you have to pick when that is. So no time, but you have to understand that there's limited times where you can do that, and you shouldn't be distracted when you are.
Sorry, I apologize. I'm getting a little bit of audio distortion. Let me ask, hey, this is insightful. I think we could talk for a couple more hours, but one thing we like to close on is ask, what are you reading these days? What's on your reading list, or a book that you found to be insightful here recently?
So I'm reading history books, and I think last time I spoke to you, I was reading a book on Washington. So I was just picked up a book on Ben Franklin. So I want to go back and see him. I think for the times we have now, I kind of like going back to our founding fathers and see like, how in the mess we were back then, how did they figure out where we were, to create what we have now. So awesome. I actually can't remember the name of that book, but that's my book now that I just picked up.
I'll ping you offline, and we'll put a link to it in the notes for the show. So thank you so much for joining us. Very, very insightful, and lots of great stories and lots of lessons I think that can be applied to others along the way as well.
Yeah. Hey, well, thank you, Matt, and sorry about the audio here towards the end.
Yeah, no worries. Take care. Thanks.
All right.
Thanks for listening to this OODA Loop production. For the latest analysis on cybersecurity, technology, and global risks, please visit www.oodaloop.com.